For 11 years, Nathaniel Reyes told his investors the same thing. The algorithm never sleeps. On a Tuesday morning in March, 300 of them found out that neither had he, not because he was working, but because there had never been an algorithm at all. By 9 a.m., the lobby of Larkmoor Capital Partners was full of retirees holding printed statements that said they were millionaires. By 11, federal agents were carrying out the hard drives. By noon, Nathaniel Reyes was gone. Not arrested. Gone. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning. Case File 07, Larkmoor Capital Partners. Nathaniel Reyes never worked on a trading floor. He never worked at a bank. What he had was better than experience. He had a story, and he told it perfectly. A childhood spent watching his father lose everything in a market crash. A promise, made at 17, to build something that could never fail. A self-taught genius who dropped out of a finance program not because he couldn't keep up, but because, in his words, the professors were teaching yesterday's math. Investors loved that story. Nobody checked it. If they had, they would have found no father, no crash, no dropout, just a man who understood, better than anyone in the room, that people don't invest in numbers. They invest in narrative. He called it the Aurora Protocol, a proprietary trading algorithm, he said, that read market microstructure faster than any human desk and delivered something no honest fund manager would ever promise. Consistency. 11% a year. Not 8, not 15. 11 on the nose, quarter after quarter, in good markets and bad. To a room full of retirees who had watched their savings whipsaw through 2 recessions, that number wasn't just attractive, it was a relief. He opened Larkmoor Capital Partners with 12 investors and $400,000. He rented an office 1 floor too nice for a firm that size because he understood something most first-time fund managers don't. Trust is a visual language before it's a financial one. Wood paneling, a view, a secretary who called every client by name. None of it produced a single dollar of return. All of it produced the only thing Larkmoor actually needed to survive, the appearance that it didn't need to try. He would later tell a business journalist that his greatest fear in those early days was running out of money before the algorithm proved itself. That quote would resurface 11 years later in a very different kind of publication. The first checks came from people he knew personally, a retired school teacher who had taught his younger sister, 2 deacons from his mother's church, a man who had once given him a summer job cutting lawns. Reyes made sure their first quarterly statements arrived exactly on time, with exactly the return he'd promised, because he understood the second thing that first-time fund managers rarely do. The money for the first statement doesn't have to come from an algorithm. It just has to come from somewhere. It came from the deposits of the next investors in line. None of them knew that yet, of course. They only saw a number that never wavered, delivered by a man who never seemed to sweat. The lawn-cutting client told 2 friends. The school teacher told her book club. Within 18 months, Larkmoor had 90 investors and $11 million. And Nathaniel Reyes had learned the second half of his own business model. Growth doesn't just look like success. It funds it. Every new dollar that came in the door didn't go into any algorithm. It went straight into the account that paid the returns he owed to everyone who'd invested before them. As long as the line of new money kept moving, the machine behind the curtain never had to exist. He started giving talks at community centers and country clubs, always the same structure. Humility first, numbers second. "I'm not smarter than Wall Street," he'd say. "I just refuse to gamble with your children's future the way they do." The line drew applause every single time. A local news station profiled him as the quiet genius reinventing retirement. He hired a receptionist and 2 analysts whose actual job was to generate quarterly statements from a spreadsheet template, not a trading desk. He had no idea, standing at that podium, that a producer in that same news studio would one day be assigned to cover his indictment. By year 4, Larkmoor managed $60 million across 400 investors, and Reyes made his first real decision as a criminal rather than merely an opportunist. He started a second, institutional fund and used money from its new investors to smooth out redemptions in the original one. 2 Ponzi schemes now, feeding each other, each one's mouth stitched to the other's tail. He bought a lake house that year. He told investors it was a modest reward for a decade of discipline. It was, in fact, purchased entirely with their principal. 2 of the analysts he'd hired straight out of business school would later testify against him without ever having seen a single genuine trade. The first serious money, the kind that comes with lawyers and due diligence teams, arrived through a hedge fund consultant named Priya Okonkwo Bell, who ran the numbers on Larkmoor's 5-year track record and found something that should have alarmed her more than it did. Statistical smoothness. No down quarters. No volatility that matched the actual market during that period. She raised it once, gently, in a private meeting. Reyes told her the algorithm was designed to hedge against exactly that kind of noise. She wanted to believe him. She had 14 years in the industry and a reputation for being hard to fool, and some part of her understood that admitting she'd been fooled would cost her more than staying quiet. She recommended Larkmoor to 3 institutional clients that year. All 3 joined. Reyes never mentioned in any of those meetings that the hedging she was asking about was, in fact, the only honest word in the entire pitch, because there was nothing underneath the numbers to hedge in the first place. The end began, as it almost always does, with someone who had nothing to lose by asking a rude question. Marcus Delaney was a junior compliance analyst at a much larger firm that had turned down a partnership with Larkmoor 2 years earlier. Not out of suspicion, but because the deal terms weren't attractive enough. Bored one weekend, he pulled Larkmoor's public regulatory filings and did something almost nobody in 11 years had bothered to do. He checked whether the fund's reported trading volume was even possible on the exchanges it claimed to use. It wasn't, not by a wide margin. Delaney wrote it up as an internal memo, half expecting it to be ignored. Instead, it reached a reporter named Aisha Cormier, who had spent 3 years covering retirement fraud and had learned to recognize the specific silence of a fund that never returned journalist phone calls. She filed records requests. She found the second fund. She found that the Aurora Protocol had never been registered, patented, licensed, or independently audited by anyone who wasn't already on Larkmoor's payroll. Her first article ran with a headline that named "No Crime" and needed to name none. Where does Larkmoor's 11% actually come from? Reyes's response was immediate and, for the first time in the story, openly aggressive. He threatened Cormier's outlet with a defamation suit before the second article ran. He called an emergency meeting with his largest investors and told them the story was the work of a competitor with an axe to grind. He offered early redemptions to the 3 loudest skeptics in the room, a calculated bleed designed to buy silence from the people with the most influence over everyone else's confidence. It worked for 11 days. On the 12th day, the Securities and Exchange Commission subpoenaed Larkmoor's bank records, and the arithmetic that had held for 11 years finally ran out of new investors to hide behind. Redemption requests outpaced deposits for the first time in the fund's history. Reyes wired $4 million out of the firm's operating account to a shell entity in the Caribbean on a Friday afternoon. By Monday, investigators had frozen every account they could find. He was not in the building when they arrived. The prosecution's case, when Larkmoor Capital Partners finally reached a courtroom, rested on a single, devastating exhibit. 11 years of audited-looking statements, laid side by side with 11 years of actual bank transfers, showing that not $1 of investor money had ever touched a real trade. The lead prosecutor called it a machine with no engine, built entirely out of other people's trust. She read from Reyes's own community center speeches, the ones about refusing to gamble with children's futures, and let the courtroom sit with the distance between those words and the wire transfer records. She called Priya Okonkwo-Bell to the stand. Okonkwo-Bell testified that she had noticed the statistical smoothness years earlier and had been reassured rather than pressed further. It was not a confession of guilt. She faced no charges. But it was, in the courtroom's own words, a portrait of an industry that mistakes charm for evidence. The defense did not deny the numbers. It could not. Instead, it argued something harder to dismiss outright: that Nathaniel Reyes had begun, at least in his own account, believing he could build the algorithm eventually. That the early years were meant as a bridge, not a permanent fraud, and that the scheme metastasized because he could never find a moment to admit failure without destroying every life already tied to his. This was not a man who set out to steal, his attorney argued. This was a man who lied once and then spent 11 years too afraid to stop. The defense called 2 longtime employees who testified that Reyes had, on at least one occasion, personally covered a client's medical emergency out of his own pocket. Evidence, they argued, that greed alone couldn't explain what happened at Larkmoor. The prosecution's answer was simple. Whatever Reyes believed about his own intentions in year 1, he had made an active, repeated choice in every year that followed, choosing a lake house over disclosure, choosing new investors over honesty, choosing his own comfort over 400 people's retirements for 11 straight years. Intent to defraud, she argued, doesn't require intent from day one. It only requires the decision to keep going once you know the truth. You've heard the case. 11 years, 400 investors. A number, 11%, that was never a return on anything except other people's faith. Here's my verdict. I don't think Nathaniel Reyes is unique, and that's what makes this case worth closing carefully rather than closing quickly. I think he is a very ordinary kind of coward who discovered, by accident, that his cowardice was profitable. The defense wants you to believe there's a meaningful difference between a man who plans a fraud from day one and a man who backs into one and can't find the exit. I don't think there is. Not for the school teacher. Not for the deacons. Not for anyone who woke up on that Tuesday morning holding a statement that told them they were rich. A fraud doesn't become more forgivable because the person committing it was too frightened to stop. If anything, that's the more dangerous version, because it means the machine doesn't need a villain to keep running. It just needs someone ordinary, scared of one hard conversation, who keeps choosing the easier lie every single morning for over a decade. Some of you are already typing his defense right now. Good. Tell me where I'm wrong. Larkmoor Capital Partners is fictional. The pattern is not. Case closed.